Hello, my sweet Vegians, Evie the Original Master here, and welcome back to another VeggieTales review. So in this video, I'll be reviewing Esther, the Girl Who Became Queen, released on September 30th, 2000. And this episode is actually a, a really weird one. It's because that I don't like the format of this episode. I think this is one of the weirdest episodes of VeggieTales, in my opinion, because of the way how it's formatted. And I just really didn't like the Esther character that much. So, in Esther, the Girl Who Became Queen, the episode is taking place in Persia, where Mr. Lunt is played by a character named Heyman, and his king, played by Mr. Nezer, who is actually in the search for a new queen. So they kicked out the old queen because she was being very rude, and she wasn't doing that well as for ruling the kingdom. So they had to search for a new queen. This episode has a narrator in it, and I really didn't like the narrator in this episode is because that I just didn't like the way how he sounded, and it just didn't felt right. It could have been better if they had Bob the Tomato or another character narrating this, but they decided to pick a narrator that sounds a little bit off, in my opinion. So we are then introduced to Esther and her cousin Mordecai, played by Paul Grape, and the reason why they are here is because that they were sent here, and Heyman and the king doesn't like cousin Mordecai and Esther being here in Persia. I know I'm doing a very bad job telling the story for this episode. It's because that this episode just really doesn't fit me, because I just honestly just don't care about Esther. I'm reviewing it is because I want to give you guys my thoughts of it, so that's why I've decided to review this episode. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the parts that I really cared about. The puppy lady actually made her debut in this episode, which was the queen who played the accordion singing the puppies song, singing "Puppies are cuddly, puppies are cute, they're never nasty or mean." And what makes this song really unique is because then at the end she just screams and then she just barks like a dog, and I thought that was pretty funny for this to be one of the funniest and weirdest songs in the VeggieTales series. That's actually the best part of this episode, was the puppy lady song, the puppy song, basically. And so Mr. Nezer and Heyman didn't like the song that much, so they called in Esther to come in to sing. And she sings a song called "The Battle Is Not Ours." And this is just where the episode just goes really boring, because the songs in this episode does not feel like VeggieTales songs. They feel like songs that should be like in Disney or some crap. So anyways, Esther is now queen of Persia. Haman is trying to kick Mordecai out because they don't have good chemistry together. So there's this one scene in the episode where Jean-Claude and Felipe P, the French Peas, was going to drop a piano on Mr. Nezer where there was a cake in the center. Larry the Cucumber is in this episode, but he doesn't have that much speaking roles. He's just there writing on a script or something. I don't know what it is, but yes, he basically had little to none speaking roles. He did have speaking lines in this episode, but they were minimal. And I just didn't find Larry's appearance to be that great. So, after that, Mr. Nezer and Mr. Lunt, or Heyman, realized that the French Peas came uninvited, so they were going to be sent to the island of Tickling, which is a punishment for them. And it's pretty much a harmless punishment because it just shows a guy in a cloak with a feather and just tickling them. And yeah. So then Esther then realizes that Heyman is trying to get rid of her family, so she tries to warn Mr. Nezer about it. So to wrap things up, Esther then tells Mr. Nezer that it was Heyman that he was trying to get rid of her family, and that's where Mr. Nezer then kicks Mr. Heyman out of Persia to be sent to the island of Tickling, because Mr. Nezer realized that Esther was the one who saved him from being crushed by the piano. So that's basically why Mr. Nezer sent Heyman to the island of Tickling, because he was doing bad things, and that's basically how the episode ends. I know it did a terrible job describing the whole story for this episode, but this is just one of those episodes that I just really didn't care for. Esther, the Girl Who Became Queen, is a pretty mediocre episode. I was gonna give it an okay. I've decided to change my rating. It's because that even though the Puppy Lady song was pretty good and all, I just didn't like the whole Disney-esque vibe this episode had to provide. It just didn't feel like VeggieTales for me. I think Esther is probably the only female VeggieTales character that I don't like. Laura and Petunia Rebarb are way better characters than Esther, and that's why they became more common in VeggieTales, and they dropped Esther out of the picture because she wasn't that great of a female character, and that's why they invented Petunia Rebarb, and she's a much better character overall. So overall, Esther, the Girl Who Became Queen, is pretty much a meh episode, despite of how boring it was, and it just didn't feel that great. So I'm gonna give this episode a 6 out of 10. So that was my review for Esther, the Girl Who Became Queen. I'll see you guys next time on my review on A Snoodle's Tale. So I'll see you guys then. God makes you special, and He loves you very much. Bye.